So we're continuing with Josephus, and we're still in his life. We haven't gotten to Roman wars, but of course his life involves the Roman wars, so we're hearing a brief synopsis of the wars through his life. And if to just backtrack a little bit, there was a revolt in Jerusalem in which Roman troops were brought to Jerusalem. They were defeated soundly. More troops were brought in. They were defeated soundly. There was a tremendous sense of euphoria amongst the zealots in Jerusalem that this is a war we can win. Josephus was sent to the heart of the rebellion, which was really in the north at this point. I should mention, sadly, that history records that this was the peak of decisive battles against the Romans.
So you said he was sent by who?
He was sent by the leadership in Jerusalem to the Galilee, along with two other...
Okay, leadership? Roman leadership?
No. It was still Jewish leadership, the political leadership.
What's he supposed to do? They're fighting up there? They're fighting?
There is the beginning of the fighting going on, but it's clear that Vespasian is moving into the Galilee and with very significant troops and is going to crush the rebellion. He has been sent north with two other priests with a duty to A, defend the north, and B, to make sure that battles, in his own mind he describes it, battles are not fought that don't need to be fought. That is to say, if we can find a political compromise with the Romans that will allow us a certain amount of sovereignty and avoid a lot of Jewish deaths, it's a compromise that should be worked on. His opinion is the opinion of many people in the north, but there is also a tremendous movement of the north of zealotry. John of Gascala, who's the leader of the zealots, Gascala is in the north, that's where he comes from, and he feels that they can defeat the Romans, and should. Josephus's view, as he's expressed it going forward, is that this is an unwinnable war, and that the Roman legions, the Roman armies, if they choose to, they can defeat us. They have the wherewithal to do it. So
why was he sent up north? To convince them to withdraw?
He had two purposes. One was to avoid war if possible, but also to create powerful defenses as well. Right? By the way, it's easier to negotiate from strength than from weakness. Right? However, what we've seen already is a tremendous amount of disunity among the Jewish forces already, between the Essenes and the Zealots, the Pharisees and the Sadducees. They all have different views and different self-interests, I should add as well. Josephus describes himself as a Pharisee, but it's clear that he comes from a Sadducee family and background. He also seems to imply he has a very good understanding of the Essenes as well.
Were the Essenes, though, still closer to the Pharisees? Were they just people who separated from the main group because maybe they thought it wasn't because of...
I wouldn't call them as... I would say some of their political views were closer to the Pharisees in terms of dealing with the Romans.
Like their observance of Torah, their interpretation of Torah.
I think they found that the rabbinic movement of the Pharisees and the temple itself had become very corrupt, and they had issues with that. They really had moved from Jerusalem. What we know about the Essenes, we know mostly from where? From the Dead Sea Scrolls, right?
They are the guys from the Dead Sea Scrolls.
Yeah, but they were not native to that part of Israel. They were native to Jerusalem and moved there in a statement of saying, we don't want to be part of the corruption of this place. So, it's very hard to describe them as close to the Pharisees, really. But in terms of how they felt about the Romans, I would say they were closer to the Pharisees, certainly than they were to the Sicarii and the Zealots. The Sadducees seem to be described by many, including Josephus, as people who are more than willing to I don't want to use the word collaborate, but make compromises with the Romans. They were an upper-class community. They were landholders, significant landholders, and they kind of seemed to have a bit of an understanding with the occupiers that the Pharisees did not have. At the same time, they weren't the zealots that the Pharisees were. They were leaned on the other side. When war actually came, the Sadducees were active in the war as well. In fact, everybody was active in the war in one way or another when the war actually came, but we'll come to that later. So Josephus finds himself in the Galilee, and he sees, there's one other factor, right? There's a tremendous bias by the Roman governors and all of the Roman administrators, whether it's national through the whole, really, province of Israel, because Israel is now a province of Rome in a sense, to local procurators, the local Roman governors of cities and parts of Israel, that they showed tremendous bias against the Jews living in the land of Israel and in favor of the non-Jews. There are many non-Jews who were living in Israel at the time of the Second Temple. And this was in terms of tax collection, in terms of punishment, in terms of other things. And this was something that particularly riled the Jews. They saw it as very unfair. And finally, there's a tremendous amount of disrespect shown to the temple and to Judaism itself.
There's a description.
Right. The description of Roman soldiers who would, on the Temple Mount, moon is the best word I have for it. The people approaching the temple, the building in the temple of statues of Hadrian and Caligula. And it was, and these things were...
They put it right
sometimes these things were done globally, of course, the Roman Empire, and the only people who were concerned about this were the Jews. Sometimes it was done specifically in the temple environs to upset the Jews and to humiliate them. So this is where we find ourselves, right? And Josephus has gone north, and he's beginning to deal with the issues of the zealots versus on one extreme the zealots, on one extreme the collaborators, and in the middle most of the Jews, some of whom are threatened by the zealots as well. And he has a number of different tactics. Last week we heard that he was supposed to approach the zealots and say to them, I've been sent from Jerusalem, and it's very important that the weapons that we have not be misused, that we save them for the right moment and put them into the right hands. And the leadership in Jerusalem has determined that this is not the right moment, right? And we need to organize for the right moment to do this, right? That is to say to the zealots, look, I'm behind you. When the time comes, we're going to strike a blow for Israel. But this isn't the time. So hold your fire.
Okay, so I just want to get to one point again, back to the leadership of Jerusalem. Okay, what was the leadership again?
The leadership was...
I just want to define it. The Romans ruling.
The leadership
were they decided to see aristocrats? Were they...
No. The leadership were by no means collaborators, right? Mm-hmm. They were
elders.
What?
Elders. Taurus
they were elders.
Okay.
They were elders. But by the way, these are the same elders who were the teachers of Rabbi Akiva, who led it.
Okay, so the respected elders. Okay.
So they were not collaborators. We shouldn't. Okay. They were people who were more than willing to give their lives for the survival of the temple and the Jewish integrity. On the other hand, they were not anxious to sacrifice, 1 million Jewish lives and then lose. Excuse me. You okay? So, they were thoughtful people at this point. If you knew that you could not win and that the proof of your loss would be 1 million Jewish lives, innocent lives, right? It takes a tremendous... it should take prophecy, really, to be willing to commit personally those lives
Because,
on the
we had-
line, right?
That makes sense,
You know.
because you think since the
So-
Persians ruled, we were already living in a state for hundreds of years of the other powers ruling
That's right.
us, and we didn't have to go to war then, so why do it now? Let Hashem create the circumstances.
Yeah.
Like we're doing something on our own, which we have, the prophets like Zechariah and Malachi didn't ever say about going to war against ruling powers.
Yeah. Now, this question, we're going to deal with this question, but I want you to listen to Josephus's tone as we talk about his behavior, right? I just wanted to set the scene where we were, okay? So let's continue, okay? Says Josephus, "Now as soon as I was come into the Galilee, and had learned the state of things by the information of such as was told to me, I wrote to the Sanhedrin in Jerusalem about them, and required their direction as what I should do." Right? What did he hear? He had heard that some Jews had made deals with the Romans. Some Jews had been killed for trying to make peace with the Romans. Other Jews were fighting the Romans actively through sabotage and attacks, right? So this was what he had found. He writes to the Sanhedrin and says, how do I deal with it? Their direction was that I should continue there, and that if my fellow legates were willing, I should join with them in the care of the Galilee. Now this is a very interesting term, legates.
Yeah.
Right? Legates is actually a Roman term. It came into the church later. It's a Roman term which combines two qualities: a position of a general, military general, and in Hebrew would say shliach, a kind of ambassador. It's somebody who's carrying a message from Roman leaders. Now, he previously described this group, as you may remember, as myself and two other members of the priestly class who were very good character. I don't know if you remember this, when he said he's going north, that he and two other, and he describes their names, were sent north. He says, but some part of it was still quiet. They sent me and two others of the priests, who were men of excellent character, Joazar and Judas, in order to persuade ill men that they lay down their arms, and to teach them this lesson, that it were better to have those arms reserved for the most courageous men that the nation had. Right? I explained this before. But he described them here, right, as two other priests of excellent character. Here he describes them as his fellow legates, as though they're Roman ambassadors, really. Right? So he says that I should continue there, and that if my fellow legates were willing, I should join with them in the care of the Galilee. So it's really saying I should use my judgment there. But those, my fellow legates, having gotten great riches from those tithes, which as priests they were their dues, and were given to them, determined to return to their own country, meaning Jerusalem, right? That they had gotten great wealth, and there's an implication here of corruption, right? And their pockets were full and they were leaving. These were people who described as great ethical character 2 pages earlier. Yet when I asked them to stay so long that we might first settle the public affairs, they complied with me, so they didn't go. So I removed together with them from the city of Sepphoris and came into a certain village called Bethamus, 4 furlongs from Tiberias. So
4 furlongs, that's not very far.
he was in Sepphoris here, right? And he moved very close to Tiberias, so he's moving in this direction. Right? He's going from here to just outside Tiberias, right?
So Tiberias was called Tiberias in his day. Does it say Tiberias there? You just read it?
He calls it Tiberias.
Okay, so the city was held back since back then.
It sounds like a Greek name.
It's really
Roman.
Tiberias, yeah.
But isn't it Roman?
Yeah.
Just a Tiberius now, right?
They call
Yeah.
it Tveria now.
Tiberius. In English, they say Tiberius.
Yeah.
Tiberius.
So really he's in a suburb of Tiberias, right? 4 furlongs, a horse race, I think, is a furlong, isn't it? So it's very close.
Furlong?
Furlong. It's like
furlongs. It's a
probably
distance.
around a kilometer approximately.
I
or
think
not even
less.
that.
Even
Maybe
less. Yeah, less than a kilometer. Yeah.
I think once around the track, let's say that's a furlong.
Yeah. That's right.
And I don't
think
exactly
so.
know how long that is, but it's probably not a kilometer.
Yeah, so he's very close, right? And from there I sent messengers to the Senate of Tiberias. So Tiberias had a Senate, a Jewish Senate, right? That was the city council, really, right? And desired that the principal men of the city would come to see me. And when they came, Justice was sent. City would come to me. And when they were come, Justus himself being also among them. Justus himself is another name for John of Gascala, the leader of the Zealots, right? Who was with them. He came also from Tiberias, right? I told them that I was sent to them by the people of Jerusalem as a legate, right? That gives him much more authority than it gives him Roman authority, which may have irritated them. Together with these other priests, in order to persuade them to demolish that house which Herod the Tetrarch had built there, and which had the figures of living creatures in it. Although our laws have forbidden us to make such figures. So he met with the people of Tiberias, including the leader of the Zealots, and said, the reason I'm here, by the way, is to destroy Herod's house. Right? I think this is a good idea to destroy Herod's house. And one of the reasons is, I'm a Kohen. One of the reasons is because he has idols of Avodah Zarah there, and we know that that shouldn't stand. So this is clearly stating his position. I'm with you, Zealots, right? I want to deal with this, right? And I desired that they would give us leave to do so immediately. But for a good while, Capellus and the principal men belonging to the city would not give us leave, but were at length entirely persuaded by us, and were induced to be of our opinion. So Jesus, now this is not the Jesus that's famous, so Jesus, the son of Saphias, one of those whom we have already mentioned as the leader of a rebellious disturbance of mariners and poor people, prevented us, and took with him a certain Galileans, and set the entire palace on fire, and thought that he should get a great deal of money thereby, because he saw some of the roofs gilt with gold. So one of the themes we see over and over and over from Josephus is those people who he doesn't like, and those people who disobey him, he more often than not, Jews, he more often than not describes really as bandits, right? Their reasons for doing what they do is not for the welfare of the Jews. The reason why they do what they do is for personal benefit and profit and power. So here we see a group of zealots who jump the gun, and instead of destroying the Avodah Zarah in Herod's palace and dealing with it in an orderly way, they go and burn the palace. Why? Because of the value of the roof, which is covered in gold. When melted down, they'll become very rich. They also plundered a great deal of the furniture, which was done without our approval. For after we had discoursed with the Capellus and the principal men of the city, we departed from Bethamus and went to the upper Galilee. But Jesus and his party killed all the Greeks that were inhabitants of Tiberias, and its many others, as were their enemies before the war began. So they took this opportunity to settle scores, right? These are zealot Jews. Who are the Greeks? They're the Gentiles in Tiberias, right? So not only did they sack the palace, take the furniture for themselves, melt down the roof, right? And they settled scores with any of the Gentiles in the neighborhood, right? None of this was very good from Josephus' point of view in terms of how we're dealing with the future, right? And it certainly wasn't orderly. Now, we have to keep in mind analyze the actions that actually happened here. Vespasian is coming into the Galilee, right? And understand this is Josephus's view of what's going on. He's very much involved. This is not a historical point of view. This is, I had a meeting with these people. On one side I had the wise men of Tiberias. On another side I had Gascala and Jesus on the other side, right? We came to a conclusion that we were going to do this to Herod's palace. I headed north, and this is what they did. They acted like bandits, right? This is Josephus's point of view. Obviously he's upset and his feelings are hurt, by the way. It's pretty clear. When I understand this state of things, I was greatly provoked and went down to Tiberias and took all the care I could of the royal furniture to recover all that could be recovered from such as that which had been plundered. They consisted of candlesticks made of Corinthian brass and of royal tables and of great quantity of uncoined silver, and I resolved to preserve whatever came to my hand for the king. The king being Agrippa. The king is the last of the Herodian kings. He's not really a king even. So I sent for 10 of the principal men of the Senate, and for Capellus, the son of Antiochus, and committed the valuable items to them, with this charge, that they should part with it to nobody but myself. Now, does anybody remember roughly how old Josephus is giving all these orders to people?
He's like 20-something.
He's just 29. He's about to turn 30.
Actually, he's a really young man.
And he's really acting in a very authoritative way with everybody, right?
But as he described,
at the time, it was a man of. This is when.
But he described himself at the beginning as a genius. Let's say he was a genius. So, if he sees that his intellect, a person who has a great intellect, he can sense all those around him having a lesser intellect, and maybe he can take that. That's how he...
Well, let's see how brave he is as we go forward. Let's see how brave he is as we go forward. Right? So far, it's been a bluff to a large degree. I mean, he has no arms, right? He has no real money, right? He has a letter from the Sanhedrin.
He's a card artist.
From there, I and my fellow legates went to Gascala to John. As desirous to know his intentions, and soon saw that he was for innovations, and had a mind to the principality. For he desired me to give him authority to carry off the grain which belonged to Caesar, and to lay in the villages of the Upper Galilee. And he pretended that he would expend what it came to in the building of the walls of his own city. So he says to Josephus, I want to confiscate all the grain that was taken in taxes for Caesar, that's in the Upper Galilee, right? And not for myself. I'm going to sell it, and I'm going to build defenses for Gascala, for my city, right? But when I perceived what he tried at, and what he had in his mind, I said I would not permit him to do so. For that I thought either to keep it for the Romans or for myself. Now I was entrusted with the public affairs, thereby the people of Jerusalem. So he's saying, well, I have to make a decision between who's keeping this grain. Will it be the Zealots, Gascala? Will it be the Romans? Or is there a third party that might be more appropriate, named Josephus? And he concluded that Josephus was the right one, that he would confiscate the grain, Josephus would confiscate the grain, for the people of Jerusalem. But when he was not able to prevail with me, he began to my fellow legates, and so he began trying to go around me, for they had no wisdom in providing for future events. Remember, these are men described as of high moral standards, other priests, right? Now, Gascala's gone to there's 3 of them. He's gone to the 2 that are not Josephus and said, well, maybe there's a better way to manage this, right? You also have to remember Gascala himself is not just somebody who might bribe you, but he's a very dangerous person. He's a very violent person. For they had no wisdom, my fellow legates, in providing for future events, and were very ready to take bribes. So he corrupted them with money to decree that all that grain which was within his province should be delivered to him, Gaskala. When I, who was but one, was outvoted by two, and I held my tongue. Right? So there is a expression in Shakespeare, the discretion is the better part of valor. Falstaff in Henry IV, Part 2, is told by his colleagues, you have to be brave and valorous. We're going to fight tomorrow. And Falstaff asks the question, will valor bring you back from the grave? Does valor heal a wound? Will valor mend a broken leg? Methinks discretion is the better part of valor. This is a theme of Josephus, right?
He's not stupid.
Right? He says, I was outvoted by two, so I held my tongue. Right? Then did John introduce another cunning connivance. Now we're listening to Josephus being tricked by John of Gascala and not standing up to him. Right? For he said that those Jews who inhabited Caesarea and were shut up by the order of the king's deputy there had sent to him a desire him that, since they had no oil that was pure for their use, he would provide a sufficient quantity of oil for them, lest they should be forced to make use of the oil that came from the Greeks and thereby transgress their own laws. So, just in brief, there are Jews who are under siege, really, in Caesarea. And they got a message out to John of Gascala. They didn't tell him to break the siege, to go to war with who was keeping them captive. They said, the only oil we have is Greek oil, and it's not kosher. Can you supply us with oil? This is what John explains to Josephus, right? By the way, another war about oil. Seems to be an ongoing issue, right?
Well, Hanukkah was also
energy, what?
Hanukkah.
Yeah, and one might say the Iranian deal, the recent one, is about oil, right? So they can't do. Now, this was said by John, not out of his regard to religion. He's worried about kashrus. He's not working for Kor or you, right? But out of his most flagrant desire of gain. The theme comes back, right? For he knew that two sectaries are a unit, were sold to those of Caesarea for 1 drachma. That's how much it should cost. But that at Giscala, 80 sectaries were sold for 4 drachmas. He could buy the oil at a quarter of the price that he would sell it to the people.
It's profiteering.
War profiteering, exactly. That's right. War, right? So he gave the order that all the oil which was there should be carried away, as having my permission of doing it. Right. So now, think for a second. Somewhere, somehow, it's reported that Josephus has permitted John of Gascala to sell oil to captive Jews at 4 times its market price. This is what Josephus is telling us, right? But Josephus is saying, no, I knew that I couldn't argue with John of Gascala, right? And he used my name. So now the question is, was Josephus actually in on the deal or not? Really, right? He's writing this years later, right? And he's saying, you may have heard that I gave John of Gascala permission to do this, right? Absolutely not. My hands are clean, and Gascala is a bandit.
After so many years, he's still writing about this? It's still in there.
It's a very good point. Right? If he's still writing about this, There must be something that he's trying to
it's like,
cover up, right?
it's like a politician does. Right?
That's right. He may erase the hard drive, but he's still worried. Where is the server? Okay. So, all right. And having my permission for doing it, which yet I did not grant him voluntarily.
So you did already.
Wait a second. Right. But only out of fear of the multitude, since if I had forbidden him, I should have been stoned by them. So he didn't say, no, from my point of view, you can't do it. Right? You know, and they went over my head and did it. He actually did give them permission. Right? Why? Because he was afraid he was going to be stoned.
Yeah, of course.
When I had therefore permitted this to be done by John, he gained vast sums of money by this dishonesty. He did.
He did.
Right? Yeah.
And his Swiss bank account didn't have anything.
Now, I want to just review for a moment this, just to see a pattern here. Right? Josephus tells us that I came with 2 other men of excellent character. Now he says the men of excellent character were bribed by John of Giscala, and consequently I was outvoted. So we know that John of Giscala's nature is first to bribe you, right? If you take the bribe, he's happy, you're happy, we all make, you grease my palm, I grease your palm, we're all okay, right? Bakshish goes back very far, right? But Josephus says, no, I wouldn't consider a bribe. I said, no. Oh, what do those guys have in their hands? Stones? Well, let me reconsider. Okay. Reluctantly, I give you my permission because I don't want to die. He makes no mention of the fact that Giscala tried to bribe him. But that is Giscala's mode of operandi. That's how he operates. First he bribes. Why didn't Josephus mention that Giscala wanted to bribe him?
Maybe people already knew his character and decided that's not... This guy... Some people have a reputation. You can't bribe this guy.
I don't think he has this reputation yet.
Okay.
I think he just conveniently omitted to say so.
Or he took the bribe.
Yeah, he admitted.
Or he took the bribe, became rich with Giscala, right, and made up the rest of the story, right? Because Giscala has a reputation. Remember, years after the war, Giscala has a reputation of being a very violent person, right, and having a violent group with him. Right? There's a missing thing here, right? Where is the bribe that I turned down? Not mentioned, right? It often says that, in the mysteries, it says, it's not always what you see, it's what's missing. You said that this happened at 12 midnight, and you have a clock that chimes. Why didn't we hear the chime on the recording of the phone conversation? Did you reset the telephone timer to make it look like midnight? But there was no chime, it was missing. What's missing here is the offer of the bribe. But when I had dismissed my fellow legates and sent them back to Jerusalem, I took care to have arms provided and the cities fortified. So now he's alone. He sent back the corrupt guys to Jerusalem. Right? And when I sent for the most hardy among the robbers, and he's now calling them directly robbers, right? I saw that it was not in my power to take their arms from them. But I persuaded the multitude to allow them money as pay, and told them it was better for them, the multitude, to give them, the robbers, a little willingly, rather than to be forced to ignore them when they plundered their goods from them. Does everybody get which thems are thems? Right? Okay. So he's saying to the local townspeople, better to bribe the zealots with some money.
It's like a
right? Because the alternative you have is that they're going to, it's protection. Protects you.
Protection money.
Right? Protects you, right? He's saying the zealots are going to come into the city. If we pay them off with a bit of money now, right, they'll stay away. If not, you're going to have to look the other way when they ransack your homes. Right? And it doesn't mention any other possible things that might happen with the looting, but clearly it's not a good moment.
And it's the people of John Gascala, yeah?
That's who he's talking about, yeah. And when I had obliged them to take an oath not to come, meaning the bandits, not to come into the country unless they were invited to come, or else when they had their pay given to them. So they could come once. Once, if they're invited in to protect you from the Romans, right, or from others, right? It's really mafioso, right? You know, if there's another gang coming in, I call you in, you can come in. The other time you can come in is you can send somebody in to collect your monthly vig, as they say in the mafia, bakshish. I dismissed them and charged them to neither to make an expedition against the Romans nor against their neighbors that lay around them. So he's saying, these guys, you know, I said, don't start up with the Romans, because if you start up with the Romans' response will not be just to you, but they'll go after people who are unarmed and peaceful because of your behavior. So don't start up with the Romans, and don't attack your neighbors. Just take the money and be quiet. For my first care was to keep the Galilee in peace. So I was willing to have the principal of the Galileans, in all 70, as hostages for their faithfulness, but still under the notion of friendship. Accordingly, I made them my friends and companions as I journeyed, and sent them to judge causes, and with their approval, it was that I gave my sentences, while I tried not to mistake what justice required, and to keep my hands clear of all bribery in those determinations. So I'm traveling with the 70 elders, the Sanhedrin of the North, right? And we're doing our job, right? And just in case you heard anything, I kept my hands clear of bribery. I didn't take anything, right? I was now about 30. In which time of life it's a hard thing for anyone to escape the slanders of the envious. Right? You know, he's young, he's handsome, he's smart.
Sure, rich.
Remember the ad for for a hair company, I think it was, it said, "Don't hate me because I'm beautiful." Right? This is Josephus' problem. Although he restrained himself from fulfilling any unlawful desires, especially where a person is in great is in great authority, right? I'm subject to the slanders of the envious, especially because I'm so important. Yet did I preserve every woman from injuries, and as to what presents were offered me, I despised them, as not standing in need of them. Nor indeed would I take those tithes that were due me as a priest from those that brought them. I wouldn't even accept that which I am expected to accept as a Kohen. Right? Yet do I confess, here's the one terrible thing I did. Yet do I confess that I took part in the spoils of the Syrians, which inhabited the cities adjointed to us, and when I had conquered them, and that I sent it to my family in Jerusalem. Now, I don't know if you remember the story we read earlier. While he was still in Jerusalem, Syrians on the border, right, had attacked the Jews in their cities and took all their valuables. It was a kind of a pogrom, right? And the Romans had supported the Syrians in this. It allowed it to happen, right? And now comes time to take revenge against those Syrians, right? And yes, this is where I did profit a little bit. No place else, certainly not in the Protexia racket that was going on, did I? But against the Syrians, I did. And what did I do with it? I sent it to my family in Jerusalem. Right? Although, when I twice took Sepphoris by force, and Tiberias 4 times, and Gadara once, and when I had subdued and taken John, Gascala, who often laid treacherous snares for me, I did not punish them, either him or any of the people forenamed, as the progress of this discourse will prove. You'll read more about it in detail later. And on this account, I suppose it was that God, who is never unacquainted with those that do as they ought to do, delivered me still out of the hands of these enemies, and afterwards preserved me, when I fell into those many dangers which I shall relate. So at the end, he knows that he did well, because his enemies, and by the way, now he's talking about only one group of enemies, Jews, right? God protected me from those enemies at the end, is what he's saying, right? Let's leave it here, and we'll see what she's going to relate next week.
Very good.
Right?
Right. Thank you very much.